Cool. Put your hands behind your back. I'll take your bird. Let me see. I got your bird. I got him.
Got it?
I got him. I got him.
Sure.
I got his bird. Hands behind your back.
Put your left leg in there.
Cool. Thank you, Diego.
A 16-year-old apparently called 911 after allegedly executing his entire family.
Imagine waking up to find that the very person you trusted most, the one you shared a home, meals, and childhood memories with, had turned into your worst nightmare. Across America, disturbing cases have emerged where teenage boys, barely old enough to drive, committed the unthinkable, wiping out their own families in acts so cold and calculated, detectives were left questioning how such darkness could grow inside someone so young. Behind each case lies a twisted mix of hidden resentment, psychological unraveling, and shocking bursts of violence that no one saw coming. In this video, we're stepping into the minds of these killers, dissecting the warning signs, the legal battles, and the haunting aftermath that still echoes in their communities. These are the stories that will make you question just how well you really know the people under your own roof. Case 1.
They show no emotion.
Don't show emotion. That condemns him.
During his taped confession, Browning revealed little about what made him snap. Now 19 and serving a double life sentence, he's peeling back layers of his personality via a website called goodprisoner.com. His profile reads,
Nicholas Wagner Browning. In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Cockeysville, Maryland, in February 2008, a case erupted that would unsettle a community and ignite a broader dialogue about youth crime, mental health, and the criminal justice system. On the evening of February 1st, Nicholas Wagner Browning, a 15-year-old honor student, Boy Scout, varsity lacrosse and golf athlete, returned to his family's home after spending time with friends. The life parents envisioned for him, marked by privilege, possibly masked deeper psychological fractures. Reports later revealed that, despite the successful facade, Nicholas had been described both as a class clown and, by some, a bully to peers and even his younger siblings. And classmates said he joked about killing his family. Only no one took him seriously. That night, he brought a handgun belonging to his father into the house, and in a chilling act of familicide, murdered his parents, John and Tamara Browning, and his younger brothers, Gregory and Benjamin. After the murders, he staged the scene to mimic a burglary, scattering jewelry and video game equipment before returning to his friend's home for a sleepover. The following day, he played video games and visited the mall before casually reporting to police that he had found his father's body. From the outset, the investigation confronted the stark psychological dimensions of the crime. Browning's defense framed the tragedy as stemming from years of physical and verbal abuse at the hands of his father, suggesting that his fragile teenage psyche snapped under immense pressure. His attorneys painted a portrait of a child in a trance-like state, in need of rehabilitation rather than punishment. The defense's forensic psychologist testimony attempted to profile a teen overwhelmed by fear rather than a calculating perpetrator. Prosecutors presented a contrasting psychological profile, one of entitlement and premeditation. During the investigation, Browning admitted that he had joked to classmates about killing his family to avoid following parental rules and gain inheritance, comments that prosecutors interpreted as early warning signs of dark intent. In courtroom proceedings, prosecutors questioned why he would kill his younger brothers unless motivated by a desire to avoid sharing inheritance or being controlled. In May 2008, a judge ruled he would be tried as an adult, rejecting arguments for transfer to juvenile court. The judge signaled the severity of the legal proceedings to come, balancing ideas of juvenile rehabilitation against public safety and the gravity of the crime. By January 2009, Browning entered a guilty plea to 4 counts of first-degree murder, bringing the legal chapters to a close. At sentencing, the judge imposed 4 life sentences, with 2 terms to be served consecutively, though eligibility for parole could arise in 2031 if he maintains good behavior behind bars. This disturbing case highlights legal crossroads. When a juvenile offender commits a severe crime, how does the justice system balance accountability, rehabilitation, and society's demand for safety? Maryland's automatic adult charging for such violent crimes became a focal point in policy discussions, raising questions about whether the system allows space for psychological treatment or forces incarceration without addressing underlying issues. Beyond courtrooms, the tragedy triggered a broader social conversation about mental health support, youth warning signs, and community vigilance. Neighbors and classmates remembered the Browning family as civic-minded and caring. A garden memorial was created at the school to honor the younger brothers and help classmates process grief. The story also issued stark public safety takeaways. When even high-achieving youth betray aggression in offhand remarks, suppression or dismissal of those signs may lead to irreversible outcomes. The lesson extends beyond this single case. If someone, especially a minor, expresses violent thoughts, even as a joke, community members, educators, or peers could choose awareness over awkwardness. Intervention does not require suspicion of intent to tip into horrors. Early psychological evaluation or counseling, paired with law enforcement consultation, may enable preventative rehabilitation rather than reactive tragedy. Case 2. Seth Stephen Privaki. It was Thanksgiving weekend, November 29, 1998, in suburban Muskegon, Michigan, a time when most families gather in warmth and gratitude. But behind the closed doors of the Privaki household, a chilling tragedy was unfolding. 18-year-old Seth Stephen Privaki, a high school senior with a history of minor offenses and court-mandated counseling, loaded his father's .22 Ruger handgun in his bedroom. He was quietly harboring resentment, wrapped up in anger and feeling alienated by his family. Earlier, he'd been told it was time to move out, a demand that, according to him, shattered some emotional barrier. What followed was execution-style devastation. First, he shot his brother, Jedediah, while he watched television. Then he ambushed his grandfather and father as they arrived home from picking up the senior Privaki, and later his mother after she showered. When his brother's girlfriend, April Boss, arrived unannounced and saw the scene, she became the fifth fatal victim. All were shot in the head, his grandfather twice, to make sure he was dead. A once quiet B-average teen, described by friends and teachers as even-tempered, whose conduct had shifted markedly in the months before the killings. He'd faced shoplifting charges, was prescribed Wellbutrin, and received mandatory counseling. But by 1998, many of these interventions had lapsed. After the murders, Privaki called his high school friend, Stephen Wallace, for help. Together they attempted to conceal the crime, wrapping bodies in sheets, staging the scene to look like a robbery, disposing of gun parts in a pond, returning a video, even attending a church youth group meeting afterward. But fate intervened. Late that evening, April's parents, worried and searching, arrived at the Privaki home. They saw a figure leaning over a body. A panicked call to 911 followed. Authorities arrested Wallace emerging from nearby woods. A manhunt ensued, and nearly 13 hours after the murders, Privaki was found in a barn, shivering and silent, still wearing the clothes from the crime scene. This investigation peeled back layers not just of a violent act, but of a young mind in turmoil. In court, Privaki pled no contest to 5 counts of first-degree murder and associated felony firearm charges. In May 1999, the sentencing hearing delivered life imprisonment without parole. His request for a brief delay to see the world was denied. Wallace, his friend, faced the same murder charges, but was ultimately acquitted on the basis that he'd assisted out of fear for his life. Still, his life remained marred by legal troubles in subsequent years. Multiple convictions for domestic violence, theft, and probation violations, suggesting cycles of unresolved trauma or instability. Fast forward to July 15, 2010. Privaki, now age 30, tried to escape Kinross Correctional Facility with 2 fellow inmates. They carjacked a prison truck, rammed a fence, and attempted to break free. Corrections officers shot Privaki dead after he ignored commands to stop, strikingly in the head, the same fatal method he used on his family. Case 3. Brian and David Freeman. In February 1995, a quiet neighborhood in Salisbury Township, Pennsylvania, became the stage for a haunting tragedy that would challenge our understanding of youth, ideology, and family bonds. Brian Freeman, 17, and his brother David, 16, ensnared by a neo-Nazi subculture, turned their growing rage toward the parents who once raised them and a younger brother they would also betray. Their cousin, Ben Birdwell, aged 18, took part in what became one of the most chilling family murders in the Lehigh Valley's history. The Freemans had once been a devoted Jehovah's Witness family. Dennis and Brenda Freeman devoted themselves to their children's moral upbringing, fostering them in their congregation. But by their mid-teens, Brian and David rejected that world. They embraced a white supremacist skinhead ideology, even going so far as to tattoo slogans across their foreheads. Brian with Berserker, David with Sieg Heil, visual manifestations of a psychological descent fueled by rebellion. Their parents tried interventions. Brenda sought counseling and psychology help, and even persuaded the police to run anti-skinhead education programs. At one point, both boys were placed in residential treatment and juvenile facilities for substance-related and behavioral issues. But the efforts failed to reach them. Police visited the home 5 times between 1993 and 1995. Brian had even threatened violence over a family car. Tensions simmered too close to tragedy. On the night of February 26, 1995, that tension erupted into horror. The trio, Brian, David, and Birdwell, arrived at the family home after a movie outing. The confrontation turned brutal. Brian fatally stabbed his mother with a steak knife. David and Birdwell beat their father with an exercise bar and baseball bat, and young Eric, just 11, was bludgeoned in his bed with a pickaxe handle. The perpetrators fled, stealing a shotgun and the family car, and were captured 3 days later in Michigan. Case 4. Derek and Alex King. It was the pre-dawn hours of November 26, 2001, in Cantonment, Florida, when firefighters arrived on scene, responding to a house engulfed in flames. Among the smoke and chaos, they discovered a chilling sight. 40-year-old Terry King. His body battered and slumped in a recliner. The victim's 2 young sons, Derek, 13, and Alex, 12, were conspicuously absent. What began as an emergency response quickly evolved into an investigation of a lifetime, revealing a shocking blend of family dynamics, hidden allegiance, and courtroom drama. From the earliest moments, the psychological profile of these brothers became a story in itself. At such an immaturity of age, what could drive them to commit patricide? The psychological tension stemmed not just from the act, but from their shifting narratives. Initially, they admitted to attacking their father with an aluminum baseball bat while he slept, then setting the house ablaze to cover their tracks. They later recanted, implicating family friend Ricky Chavez, a man with a criminal history, as the mastermind, claiming he influenced them and even sexually abused Alex. Their testimonies swerved between self-blame, external coercion, and confusion, painting a portrait of inner conflict, loyalty, fear, and manipulation. The legal proceedings that followed were nothing short of extraordinary. Prosecutors brought Derek, Alex, and Chavez to trial, each for the same crime, yet the outcomes diverged. Chavez was acquitted of the murder and molestation charges, while the boys were convicted of second-degree murder in September 2002. Still, the judge overturned that conviction, citing due process concerns. Rather than retry the case, both brothers pleaded guilty to third-degree murder in mediation, resulting in reduced sentences, 8 years for Derek, 7 for Alex. Case 5. Colin Jeffrey C.J. Haney. In the quiet town of Grantsville, Utah, a day like any other turned eerily transformative on January 17, 2020. Behind closed doors, a methodical and chilling act of familicide unfolded over 5 hours, shaking a community that had seen its first homicide in nearly 2 decades. The man at the center was just 16. Colin Jeffrey C.J. Haney. That afternoon, Haney stayed home from school, armed and prepared. His mother, Consuelo Alejandra Haney, 52, was the first to arrive, followed by his 12-year-old sister, only to be shot upon entry. He then waited, only to execute the same horrific pattern as his 15-year-old sister arrived, and later when his 14-year-old brother came home. Each family member was killed execution style, painting a portrait of calculated tragedy rather than impulsive rage. When his father walked in that evening, Haney shot him in the leg. An intense struggle ensued, ending with the father disarming his son. In the hospital, Haney told investigators, chillingly simple, his intention had been to kill everyone in the house except himself. This unsettling confession, delivered by a child barely older than most of his victims, cast a stark light on the mental state behind the crime. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Haney was charged as an adult with 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of attempted aggravated murder, along with firearms offenses. His bail was set at $4 million, and he was placed in juvenile detention. Because of his age, Utah law prohibited sentencing him to death or life without parole, shielding a possibility, however slim, for future rehabilitation. It wasn't until July 19, 2022 that he pleaded guilty to all charges. The sentencing hearing, held on July 13, 2023, delivered a sobering outcome. 4 consecutive 25-to-life sentences, essentially a century behind bars for the murders, and a concurrent sentence for the attempted murder of his father. Defense attorney Richard Van Wagener portrayed Haney as socially awkward, anxious, and significantly underdeveloped for his age. He lacked social skills, had a speech impediment, and faced intense bullying at school. Prior red flags had surfaced: dark remarks, emotional withdrawal, and worsening conflict at home. His mother even considered therapy, but his father reportedly declined out of concern Haney might say something that would get him in trouble. Letters from neighbors described him as a good kid, lost amid a rigid home environment and pure alienation. They saw potential for maturity if given structured support. Since his arrest, Haney earned a high school diploma, pursued college courses, and reportedly engaged actively with therapy, sparking discussions about rehabilitation even amid the tragedy. Case 6. Mason Sisk. On the night of September 2, 2019, what began as a quiet evening in Elkmont, Alabama, ended with a horror that would reverberate through the criminal justice system and a small community's soul. 14-year-old Mason Sisk appeared to be doing what many others his age might do after a long day. He purported to be in the basement playing video games. That explanation would soon come undone, exposing a chilling truth. Inside their home lay 5 victims: his adoptive father, John Wayne Sisk, his adoptive mother, Mary Sisk, and 3 younger siblings, 6-year-old Kane, 4-year-old Aurora, and 6-month-old Colson, all found shot in the head in their beds. The scene stunned law enforcement and investigators, challenging even seasoned prosecutors. The official narrative shifted dramatically when Mason abandoned his initial story about hearing gunshots and seeing a vehicle depart and instead confessed he had killed all 5. This confession framed the investigation as a dark portrait of a young mind pushed beyond recognition. How does a 14-year-old marshal the resolve to commit such calculated violence? During trial testimony, prosecutors introduced evidence that Mason said he was fed up with fighting in the family, an admission that startled jurors and psychologists alike. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the courtroom became a stage for larger debates. Judge Chadwick Wise delivered a sentencing hearing that left few dry eyes, not only for its gravity, but for its legal symbolism. Despite Mason's youth, the judge ruled that the crime was ghastly, disturbing, and draped in unmitigated evil, and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the days that followed, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed both his conviction and sentence, issuing a detailed 17-page memorandum that rejected his appeal in November 2024, cementing that Mason Sisk would remain behind bars for life. He is now housed at the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison known for long-term inmates with life without parole sentences. Case 7. Diego.
Let's go. Any weapons on you? Come over here.
Come over here. Step over here, boss.
Step up, man.
Step over here. Cool. Put your hands on your bird. I'll take your bird. Let me see. I got your bird. I got him. I got him. I got him. I'm not. I got his bird. Hands on your back.
Griego Leva. He calls at 3:30 a.m. on December 14, 2024, a trembling voice delivered in slurred confession. I killed my parents, my whole family, says 16-year-old Diego Leva. This chilling phone call prompts swift action. Deputies from the Valencia County Sheriff's Office arrive in Belen, New Mexico. Diego emerges calmly, hands raised, extremely intoxicated, and surrenders without resistance. Inside, authorities discover the lifeless bodies of his father, 42-year-old Leonardo Leva, his mother, 35-year-old Adriana Bencomo, his 17-year-old sister Adrian, and 14-year-old brother Alexander. A pistol lies on the kitchen table. At the core of this tragedy is a family annihilation, a rare but devastating occurrence. This marks the 29th mass murder in the U.S. in 2024, a category defined by 4 or more victims in a single event. These crimes often unfold behind closed doors, challenging communities to understand how such horror arises within a household. The investigation unfolds under intense scrutiny. New Mexico State Police's Investigations Bureau and crime scene team meticulously process the scene. Interviews and forensic analysis begin to uncover motive, circumstance, and context. Diego undergoes medical detoxification before booking at the Juvenile Justice Center in Albuquerque around 1 a.m. on December 15th. A haunting piece of the record is that 911 call. Drunken, disoriented, and unsettled. Diego tells dispatchers he felt possessed, unsure of what drove him to the act. His words betray a man suspended between consciousness and unconsciousness, grappling with forces he cannot name. In communities like Belen, the shock reverberates. Teachers who remembered him as quiet and unassuming now find themselves grappling with disbelief. One educator remarks, "I would never have thought that something like this would happen, and that Diego would be capable of doing something like this." The community mourns not just the loss of lives, but also the child they thought they knew. Diego faces 4 open counts of first-degree murder, charged as an adult. The process will traverse juvenile and adult court boundaries, with possible transfer to adult court given the severity and scale of the crime. Meanwhile, district attorneys await the complete investigation before presenting the case, evidence, and psychological assessments. Case 8. Nehemiah Griego. In the quiet South Valley of Albuquerque, New Mexico, on January 19, 2013, the familiar hum of family life was shattered by a tragedy that would test the reaches of psychology, justice, and public safety. Nehemiah Griego, a 15-year-old son, armed with rifles, methodically took the lives of his parents and 3 younger siblings. The weapons, a .22 caliber Marlin rifle and a .223 caliber Sig Sauer, lay waiting in a closet owned by his father, and over that night turned from instruments of safety to agents of unimaginable loss. The investigation unveiled a chilling premeditation. Nehemiah had planned the killings for days, confessed he'd intended to drive into a public place, a Walmart, and carry out a massacre before dying in a shootout with law enforcement. This disturbing revelation elevated the case from a horrifying family crime to a broader crisis of juvenile violence and mental health. From the earliest moments, questions cascaded. How does a gifted young teenager become capable of such violence? Friends and family described Nehemiah as talented, a keen musician and athlete, active in church life, yet also troubled, his behavior giving little warning before the carnage. The psychological profile grew more complex. Investigators noted homicidal and suicidal ideation, He confessed to these thoughts, later delivered gruesome imagery to his girlfriend, and displayed a shocking detachment at the scene. In the legal proceedings that followed, the first question was whether Nehemiah would be treated as a juvenile or tried as an adult. In October 2015, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of child abuse, resulting in death. In 2016, a judge found him amenable to juvenile treatment, signaling a potential release from a youth facility at age 21. But the district attorney appealed, raising concerns for public safety and the limits of rehabilitation. In 2018, Nehemiah returned to court for an amenability hearing to assess whether rehabilitation had taken root. By 2019, a New Mexico judge, in a sentencing hearing, informed by trial testimony and psychiatric evaluations, concluded that Nehemiah remained not amenable to treatment. The judge emphasized that releasing him would present an unacceptable risk to the community. In June 2022, the state Supreme Court upheld the decision. Nehemiah would serve 3 concurrent life sentences with the possibility of parole after 30 years for child abuse convictions, plus 2 concurrent 7-year sentences for second-degree murder, eligible for parole when he is 52. The court rejected his argument that denying juvenile treatment constituted cruel and unusual punishment, finding he still had a meaningful opportunity for release, and his claims of inadequate treatment were speculative. Case 9, Daniel Petrich. In October 2007, 16-year-old Daniel Petrich, an otherwise average church-going teenager from Wellington, Ohio, descended into tragedy. After enduring a year confined to home due to a severe spinal injury, Petrich found solace in playing Halo games for hours at a friend's house. He was introduced to the shooter Halo franchise and became deeply immersed in its world. Halo 3, the newly released installment, became an obsession, at times consuming him up to 18 hours a day. His father, Mark Petrich, a Pentecostal minister, opposed violent video games. When Daniel covertly brought home Halo 3, his father locked it away in the same safe as the household handgun. This triggered a catastrophic chain of events rooted in psychological dynamics: addiction, blurred boundaries between virtual and real consequences, youthful impulsivity, and desperation. 1 week later, Daniel retrieved both the game and the gun from the safe. That evening, he approached his unsuspecting parents on the couch and invited them to close your eyes. I have a surprise for you, then opened fire. His mother, Susan, suffered fatal wounds. His father, Mark, survived but critically injured. In a chilling attempt to stage the scene as murder-suicide, Daniel placed the gun in his father's hand and fled with Halo 3 still in the passenger seat of the family van. He was arrested shortly after. The defense argued that Daniel, enmeshed in the gaming world, perceived real people as respawning characters, unable to process finality. He was reported to have planned the crime for a week, yet his attorney portrayed it as influenced by psychological stress following injury, isolation, and gaming-induced cognitive blurring. Legal proceedings unfolded as a bench trial, no jury, before Judge James Burge. The defense raised an insanity argument, citing video game addiction and immaturity. The prosecution countered that addiction is not a legal defense and maintained that Daniel had plotted his actions deliberately, pointing to the staging, weapon access, and calculated timing. In June 2009, the judge found Daniel guilty of aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, and tampering with evidence. Because of his age, the death penalty was off the table. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years, the minimum under Ohio law. At sentencing, Daniel was tearful. His father, expressing deep regret, asked for leniency, describing how Daniel often repeated, "I miss Mom," and how he still does not understand why he did something so terrible. Even amid devastation, this highlighted a complex dynamic of remorse and familial bonds. Today, Daniel Petrich remains incarcerated in Grafton Correctional Institution with parole eligibility in 2030. His case is referenced in broader debates on violent video game effects, addiction, mental health, and youth crime. Though Microsoft, publisher of Halo, offered only a brief statement expressing awareness and sorrow, the tragedy sparked national discussion on gun access, media influence, and family dynamics. Case 10. Nikita Kassap, a 17-year-old teenager from Waukesha, Wisconsin. Nikita Kassap stood at the heart of a chilling case that rapidly captured national attention. In late February 2025, after weeks of missing school and strange messages sent from his stepfather's phone, authorities entered the Kassap home and discovered a horrifying scene. His mother, Tatiana Kassap, and stepfather, Donald Mayer, had been shot, their bodies so decomposed that identification required dental records. Investigators estimated that they'd been slain around February 11, and that Nikita had remained in the house for nearly 2 weeks after, even continuing to communicate with school and other contacts from their accounts. What unfolded next drew law enforcement and the public into a disturbing psychological labyrinth. 2 days after the bodies were found on February 28th, Nikita was arrested during a traffic stop in rural Kansas. He was driving his stepfather's SUV, accompanied by the family dog, in possession of cash, jewelry, identification, ammunition, the gun believed to be the murder weapon, and passports. As the investigation deepened, a darker and more complex motive emerged. Federal authorities unsealed a warrant revealing that Nikita may have killed his parents to gain funds to execute a violent extremist plot. Investigators found a 3-page anti-Semitic manifesto praising Adolf Hitler, along with bomb-making instructions, communications on TikTok and Telegram, and evidence of contact with a Russian-speaking individual. He allegedly planned the assassination of President Donald Trump, acquired a drone and explosives, and intended to flee first to Ukraine, all framed as an ideological mission to save the white race. Layered atop this are chilling insights from a classmate who reported that Nikita had sent disturbing gore edits, confessed plans to kill his parents and die by suicide, and warned ominously that if anyone revealed his words, it wouldn't end well. Fast forward to the legal arena. On May 7, 2025, the teenager pleaded not guilty to a host of charges, including first-degree intentional homicide, hiding a corpse, intimidation of a witness, theft, misuse of ID, and unlawful vehicle operation. A hearing scheduled for August 18th will determine the next steps in this labyrinthine legal process. Case 11. Reed R. Jelinek. On March 4, 2025, in the quiet Caledonia neighborhood just outside Racine, Wisconsin, a tragedy unfolded that would shake a community and captivate a nation. The story begins that night, when local authorities were summoned to a home on White Manor Court. The call came after a Snapchat message. An image of a woman lying motionless, blood pooling beneath her, was sent from inside the house. That witness had directly contacted police when she received not one, but 2 disturbing images that defied belief. When officers arrived around 10:30 p.m., the teenager at the center of this storm emerged. 15-year-old Reed R. Jelinek walked out carrying a kitchen knife, disguised in shockingly blood-stained clothing, and dropped the weapon at the front stoop as he surrendered. His chilling words lingered. "She is dead. She is dead from what I did." As investigators pieced together the event, a psychologically complex portrait emerged. Reed told them he had returned home from school feeling an inexplicable, overwhelming depression, and along with it, what he called a sudden urge to kill his parents. The psychological profile grew deeper. For about a month, he had been taking his brother's anxiety medication. Not for its intended purpose, but because in his words, it makes him high and he enjoys that. On the night of March 4th, he said, he consumed approximately 9 pills. Then came dinner, and immediately afterward, The Trigger, a Netflix documentary chronicling the Menendez brothers, Lyle and Eric, who had murdered their parents decades earlier. Reed later admitted the inspiration to commit the crime struck while watching a specific shotgun scene. When his mother, Suzanne Jelinek, an educational assistant remembered by colleagues and students for her warmth and kindness, went upstairs, Reed began to enact his plan. He hid sleeping medication, slipped a dumbbell bar into his sweatshirt sleeve, and concealed a steak knife in his pocket. When she returned downstairs responding to his plea for help, he struck her twice in the head with the dumbbell, intending only to knock her out, and followed by repeatedly stabbing her, 3 times in the chest and twice in the neck. She asked, "Why?" and Reed replied, "Pain." He then reached out via Snapchat to a friend, telling her to call the police. He sat on the floor, waiting for the sirens to arrive. This chilling sequence marries psychological planning to impulsive emotional collapse. At his first court appearance on March 6th, Reed faced first-degree intentional homicide charges as an adult, a legal transition that underscores the gravity of the crime and its implications. A $1 million bond was set. District Attorney Patricia Hansen framed the offense as extremely violent but planned, and ominously noted Reed's original intent may have extended beyond one victim. Courthouse procedures followed. Initial hearings over Zoom, supervised contact with his father approved. It was clear the wheels of the legal system were in motion. Case 12. Robert and Michael Bever. On the night of July 22, 2015, at around 11:30 p.m., the quiet of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma was shattered. 16-year-old Michael Bever and his 18-year-old brother Robert Bever launched a violent attack against their own family, ending in the deaths of 5 relatives. Through the lens of investigation and psychological profile, this case shows how evil can rise quietly within closed doors, and how the law, community, and justice system converge to respond. The initial investigation unfolded with chilling swiftness. A 911 call came from 12-year-old Daniel Bever, reporting, "My brother's attacking my family." Moments later, the connection went silent. Officers arrived at 709 Magnolia Court, following radio dispatch and realizing the call had originated there. What they discovered was not only a crime scene, but a domestic breach that pierced a trusting family network. Found at the threshold, 13-year-old Crystal Bever was gravely injured. 2-year-old Autumn lay unharmed upstairs. Daniel, tragically, had died, yet by calling the police he had unwittingly saved his sisters. As investigators entered the home, the chilling reality set in. Crystal, despite her injuries, was lucid enough to name her brothers, Robert and Michael, as the perpetrators. The psychological profile began to emerge. Neighbors described the family as secluded, the Bever brothers homeschooled with minimal outside interaction. Defense testimony later referenced allegations of verbal and physical abuse and apocalyptic religious talk in the family. Residents recalled how the parents spoke often of hated people and eschatological revenge. Robert confessed that the attack had been meticulously planned, but it didn't stop there. He and Michael intended to escalate, possibly staging a mass shooting to rival or surpass infamous tragedies like Columbine or Aurora. Evidence recovered from the home included weapons, body armor, cameras, and a USB drive. There were even plans to record the aftermath, perhaps with one version to overwhelm authorities and another to circulate online. Here the story shifts into courtroom terrain, where legal proceedings, trial testimony, and sentencing hearing dominate. On August 3, 2015, the Bever brothers appeared in court and entered not guilty pleas via video. Judge Deborah Ludi Leitch set preliminary hearings over the months to come. Prosecutors decided Michael, though only 16, would be tried as an adult. Over the next years, the case unfolded under the public eye. On September 7, 2016, Robert entered a guilty plea and received 6 consecutive life sentences. 5 for murder, 1 for attempted murder of his sister, all with no possibility of parole. The district attorney emphasized that the surviving children, already traumatized, deserved life, not a death penalty spectacle. Michael's case followed in 2018. After trial testimony, he was found guilty on all counts and sentenced on August 9, 2018, to 5 consecutive life sentences without parole, though in legal terms he technically has a chance for parole after 225 years, effectively guaranteeing lifelong imprisonment. Case 13. Jeffrey Howworth. Jeffrey Howworth, a 17-year-old high school swimmer from Lower Macungie Township, Pennsylvania, woke up on March 2, 1995, under an ordinary blue sky. His world, on the surface, typical. Church involvement, the Boy Scouts, good grades. Yet by evening, that same young man would stand accused of the unthinkable, ambushing his own parents with a rifle, leaving behind notes that referenced the Freeman family murders, and then fleeing, only to be arrested 2 days later in Missouri when his car ran out of gas. As communities around Allentown reeled from the Freeman family tragedy just days earlier, Jeffrey's act, and his note expressing admiration for the Freeman case, suggested a disturbing psychological mimicry. He seemed to have absorbed the Freeman narrative not in ideology, but in shocking structure. The violent arming, the cold calculation, the escape attempt. What truly shifts this story beyond a crime report into a psychological study is the courtroom drama that followed. Through his defense team, Jeffrey's lawyers presented a portrait of a deeply troubled adolescent, one whose descent into psychosis stemmed from undiagnosed clinical depression, possibly bipolar disorder, compounded by a brain injury and mounting social isolation. Mental health experts testified that by the time of the killings, he was unable to distinguish right from wrong. At trial, the mental health evaluation led the jury to acquit Jeffrey by reason of insanity, acknowledging that legal responsibility requires the capacity to understand one's actions. He was not sent to prison, but instead involuntarily committed to a state psychiatric hospital under strict supervision. This verdict ignited a wider debate. Should the insanity defense be abolished? Lehigh County officials questioned whether mental disease should excuse violent acts, while defenders of legal psychiatry warned that without it, truly ill defendants would be punished as if they were morally bereft rather than medically compromised. Beyond courtroom tensions and legal philosophy, this case carries pressing public safety lessons. Schools and communities must be attuned not just to ideological extremism, but to quieter signs of mental distress, decline in academic performance, emotional withdrawal, or fixation on sensational crimes. The law enforcement process, stress on forensic psychiatric evaluation, assessment of threat, secure transportation between states, demonstrated the intersection of investigative protocol and mental health care. The sentencing hearing here did not yield a prison term, but rather a path toward possible rehabilitation, under conditions that prioritize both public safety and clinical care. One takeaway lingers with unsettling clarity. Pathology can coexist with a benign exterior. Jeffrey was known as angelic-looking, a swimmer, a churchgoer, a neighbor, and yet beneath that facade, a storm was brewing. His story reminds us that danger isn't always provocatively visible. It can emerge from calculated imitation, psychological suffering, and desperation. In the end, the Jeffrey Howworth case is not just another tragic headline. It's a lesson. It's an investigation into the fragility of teenage identity, the power of criminal mimicry, the nuances of legal responsibility. It's a stark illustration of why psychological profile matters, and why legal proceedings must balance the imperative of justice with an understanding of mental disease. It's a story that alarms and educates, underscoring community roles in early intervention, the complexities of mental health and public safety, and the hope embedded in structured rehabilitation rather than simple punishment. Case 14. Alex Barani and David Anderson. In the quiet Bellevue suburb of Washington on the night of January 3rd into early January 4th, 1997, two friends, Alex Barani and David Anderson, both just 17, committed a crime that would shock the region and challenge our understanding of adolescent culpability. The pair lured 20-year-old Kimberly Ann Wilson to a park under false pretenses and strangled her. But the violence did not end there. They then entered Kimberly's home and killed her parents, William and Rose Wilson, and her sister Julia, in a calculated act of family annihilation. As investigators retraced the crime, a disturbing psychological profile emerged. Both young men had reportedly spoken about killing on a regular basis, suggesting a fascination with violence rather than an impulsive act of rage. When pressed for motive, Barani chillingly stated that he wanted to kill because he was in a rut, revealing a chilling detachment from the weight of human life. From the onset, law enforcement navigated this case with meticulous detective work, matching bloodied shoe treads, following statements and inconsistencies, and leveraging interviews to piece together a timeline. Barani eventually confessed, detailing how he strangled Kimberly and, fearing she might have told her parents her plans, decided to eliminate all witnesses. Armed with a baseball bat and knife, he entered the family home and brutally massacred them, even stealing electronics before leaving. In court, the case turned into a psychological study of youth and criminal responsibility. Prosecutors highlighted the thorough planning, premeditation, and efforts to avoid accountability, symbolized by Barani's admission he wanted to act before turning 18 so he'd receive a lighter sentence. In contrast, defense counsel emphasized their immaturity, troubled backgrounds, and potential for rehabilitation, urging that youth brain development and psychological vulnerability be weighed with mitigating factors. Initially, both were convicted as adults, each receiving 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Their trials showcased intense courtroom drama, confessions, expert testimony on adolescent brain development, and legal debate on whether juveniles can grasp the consequences of such violence. Years later, evolving criminal justice standards began to reframe their sentences. The landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision Miller v. Alabama, 2012, held that juveniles cannot be given mandatory life without parole, as their developmental capacity differs from adults. Washington followed with a Miller fix, requiring resentencing with legal proceedings that account for youth and growth. In March 2022, Anderson was resentenced to 33 years to life, with the process focused on psychological evaluation, responsibility, and the possibilities for rehabilitation. Barani's resentencing would follow in October 2024, where the judge, weighing his ongoing remorse, educational progress, and capacity for change, imposed 46 years to life, with credit for time served and the possibility of parole in the future. Case 15, Trevor Lee. The clock had just struck past midnight in Middleburg, Florida, when a seemingly ordinary night erupted into a tragedy that would grip the community and prompt a psychological reckoning. On August 4, 2025, 14-year-old Trevor Lee walked to a nearby church, carrying not a confession shrouded in denial, but raw admission. He had just shot his parents. What followed was a startling 911 call, in which he calmly reported the killings, but more hauntingly, he asked the operator to pray for him. That request of faith breaking through fear would be the first thread in a story that would explore the fragile and complex terrain of juvenile tragedy, legal process, and public safety. In that 911 call, toned gentle enough to request prayer, yet terrifying in content, an unimaginable juxtaposition emerges, a child in crisis invoking spiritual solace while admitting to violence. He'd emptied his pockets, disposed of his backpack, and waited quietly in the middle of the church. The operator's response, "I will definitely be praying for you, son," lingered for 10 minutes until deputies arrived. For a psychological profile, that moment is rich. His actions suggest shock, surrender, perhaps remorse, and a desire for absolution, or human connection at the brink of legal collapse. Family, friends, and neighbors were shattered. Trevor's parents, David Lee, age 44, and Brandy Smith, age 45, were described as loving and supportive. A cousin recalled they were among the best families he knew. Trevor himself was a good student, charismatic, funny, brimming with energy. One friend said he always brought good vibes. The contrast between Trevor's past and this moment raises urgent questions. What internal conflict, what unknown pressure cooked to this moment? Was there mental health distress, an undiagnosed disorder, or hidden trauma? The silence around such factors underscores systemic challenges. So often, cries for help go unnoticed until they surface in crisis. If these stories made you think twice, if they gripped you, shocked you, or left you craving to know what lies beneath the surface, hit that subscribe button now and join the Mindframe True Crimes family. Every week, we dive deeper into the hidden corridors of the human mind, unraveling the truths behind the headlines and the secrets even courtrooms can't fully reveal. And to all my loyal subscribers and returning viewers, thank you for keeping your mind in the frame. You're the reason we can keep shining a light into the world's darkest corners. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the mind is the most dangerous place of all. This is Mindframe True Crimes. Until next time.